The room went quiet as the doors opened. All eyes turned, not out of admiration, but out of amusement. Emily walked in, knowing what they all expected. She had been invited to this lavish gala as nothing more than a joke. The wealthy, the powerful, they were all here, and Emily was the one they laughed at. Tyler Grant, the powerful CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the world, had invited Emily, his maid, for one reason: to humiliate her. What he didn't know was that tonight, things wouldn't go as planned. This was about to turn into something no one expected. No one knew who she really was. Tyler thought this was his game, but Emily wasn't about to be anyone's punchline. What happened next would change everything, and no one, especially not Tyler, was ready for the twist. But before the night was over, the real game would begin. Emily had something no one expected, something worth more than money, power, or status. But first, let me ask you, what would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, this story is just getting started, and you don't want to be left behind. Stick with us, because in the next few minutes the stakes are about to get much higher. This isn't just about a rich CEO and a poor maid. This is about power, survival, and what happens when the underestimated finally take control. Tyler had always been a man of control, his world, his rules. But tonight, there was something different in the air. The guests gathered around, pretending not to notice Emily as she stood awkwardly in the corner. The women in their glittering gowns, the men in their perfectly tailored suits, they all acted as though they belonged here, as though they had earned their place. And then there was Emily, a maid, a nobody. At least, that's how they saw her. The crowd buzzed, whispering, waiting for the inevitable. It was a game to them. Tyler's cruel sense of humor was legendary, and everyone expected a show. Emily, to them, was a puppet. She didn't know it yet, but they were all waiting for her to stumble, waiting for her to be the punchline. Tyler's eyes met hers across the room. He could see the discomfort in her posture, the slight hesitation in her step. He grinned. The joke was working. But then, something shifted. The way she stood. The way her eyes narrowed as she surveyed the crowd. There was a new energy around her, something unexpected, something Tyler hadn't planned for. And that was the first crack in his perfect little world. Emily was no longer the timid maid who shuffled behind him in the grand halls. She was something else now, something he couldn't quite place. It unsettled him. He glanced away, as if to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. His guests were watching her, whispering, waiting to see how she'd react to the mockery. But Emily was done being anyone's joke. She straightened her back, adjusted the hem of her simple dress, and walked toward the crowd. The moment her heel clicked on the marble floor, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, and for the first time that night, it wasn't to laugh. It was to watch. Tyler's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if it was nervousness or the thrill of the challenge, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. Emily, the woman he'd underestimated, was now the center of attention. The show had only just begun, and Tyler had no idea how it would end. She moved through the crowd with a grace that belied her humble background, her eyes meeting each person's gaze with calm determination. The whispers faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. People weren't sure how to react. The woman they expected to cower before them was instead standing tall, unflinching. Tyler watched in stunned disbelief as she engaged in conversation with his closest friends, matching their wit and intelligence at every turn. She wasn't just holding her own, she was outshining them. Tyler's mind raced. This wasn't what he'd planned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control, the one laughing. But the more he watched her, the more the joke started to feel like something else, something much more dangerous. Isabella's beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was in the way she carried herself, in the way she commanded the space around her without a single word. Tyler had invited her here to mock her, but now he realized that she might just be the one pulling the strings. The night before the gala, Isabella sat in her small, modest apartment, staring at the invitation in her hands. The words were the same as they'd been when she first read them, yet they seemed to mock her even more now. You're invited to the Grant Gala. Dress code: formal. Please join us for an unforgettable evening. Unforgettable evening, she thought bitterly. She had never been to a party like that. A party where the wealthy flaunted their lives like a parade, where every conversation was a performance, and every glance felt like an assessment. She had been cleaning for the Grants for 3 years, and yet, in all that time, she had never been invited to anything. Until now. And even then, she wondered if it was a sick joke, a way for Tyler to show off in front of his high society friends. She put the invitation down on the small coffee table in front of her. The worn-out armchair creaked beneath her as she leaned back, her eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the walls, the faded rug beneath her feet. There was a certain comfort in this space, a quiet sanctuary from the world outside. But tonight, it felt suffocating, the weight of the invitation pressed against her chest. Why had Tyler invited her? What was his game? What did he want from her? She knew Tyler, the way he laughed at her, the way he made jokes at her expense. He thought her place was behind the scenes, unnoticed and invisible. But what if she went? What if she showed him, and all of them, that she was more than just the help? The thought lingered, gnawing at her. She could go. She could show them all. The people at that gala, rich, successful, and powerful, could never see her as they did in her dirty apron, scrubbing their floors. But tonight, she could be something else. Someone else. Isabella looked at the invitation again, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. Formal attire, it said. She didn't own anything formal. The most expensive piece of clothing she owned was a second-hand blouse from the local thrift store, and even that had long since lost its luster. But something deep within her stirred. She wasn't about to let that stop her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then stood up decisively, moving towards the worn-out closet in the corner of her room. The simple, familiar ritual of picking out clothes now felt monumental. She wanted to be bold. No, she needed to be bold. She needed to remind herself who she was. Not just the maid, not just the invisible worker in the background. Isabella Davis had a mind of her own, and a fire inside her that no one had yet seen. As she searched through her meager wardrobe, she pulled out a dress, a deep emerald green. It wasn't much, but it was the nicest thing she had. She had bought it on sale at a local boutique years ago, the only piece of clothing that made her feel like she belonged to a world beyond her own. She held it up in front of the mirror, wondering for the first time if she might actually look the part. If she could step into a world that wasn't just meant for the rich, for the powerful. But she was still Isabella, and that was the truth that sat in the pit of her stomach, the truth that made her hesitate, made her question herself. What am I even doing? She thought. But then, in the quiet of the room, she heard a voice. Her voice, louder than any doubt. You deserve this. You deserve to be seen, to be heard. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and slipped into the dress. The fabric hugged her in all the right places, and as she turned toward the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. For the first time in a long time, she felt powerful. The dress was just fabric, but the confidence that came with it was something that came from within. For a moment she stood there, unsure. She could still back out. She could go to work the next day, keep her head down, live the life she had always known. But she couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't take this chance, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She picked up the invitation again and tucked it into her bag. Tomorrow night she would go to the gala. She would show them all what they had underestimated, and, just maybe, she would show herself too. The night arrived faster than Isabella expected, but the weight of it was enough to make her feel as if time itself had slowed down. She stood at the edge of the driveway, staring up at the towering gates of the Grant estate. The house loomed above her, a fortress of marble, glass, and steel, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens and expensive cars parked along the long driveway. A mansion built on wealth, status, and power. A world so far removed from her own that it seemed almost unreal. She took a deep breath and tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, the only thing that remained familiar. Inside, a simple dress, and a mix of determination and nerves. She had no idea what to expect, but she wasn't about to let fear control her now. The doorbell rang in her ears as she stepped forward, her heart racing. A butler opened the door, dressed in a black suit, his expression neutral but polite. "Miss Davis, welcome," he said. His voice detached as he gestured for her to enter. She nodded and stepped inside, feeling the sudden warmth of the house envelop her, as if she were entering another world. The hallway was long, with elegant chandeliers casting their soft glow over the polished marble floors. The hum of quiet conversations echoed from behind ornate doors as she was led into the grand ballroom. She could already hear the laughter and clinking of glasses, the sound of the city's elite mingling in a way that made her feel more out of place than ever. She tried to keep her head held high, despite the overwhelming sense of being an outsider. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the designer dresses, the tuxedos, the expensive jewelry. The people here were more than just rich. They were untouchable. And then, she noticed him. Tyler Grant, standing at the center of the crowd, effortlessly charming the people around him with his easy smile and magnetic presence. He was exactly what everyone expected, the perfect heir to a legacy of wealth and influence. But tonight, something about him felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but as his eyes landed on her, she saw a flicker of something that made her stomach tighten. Was it guilt? Amusement? Or something deeper? She couldn't tell. Tyler's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. Then he straightened his tie, as though adjusting himself for a performance. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth and rehearsed, as he made his way toward her. "I'm so glad you could join us." His words sounded genuine enough, but there was something behind them, a thinly veiled mockery that only she could feel. She forced a smile, not giving away any of the doubt or nerves bubbling inside her. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Grant," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. She didn't want to look weak, not in front of him, not in front of these people who clearly thought she didn't belong. The crowd began to shift as more people gathered around, curiosity glinting in their eyes. They were waiting for something, waiting for her to falter, for her to make a mistake, for the joke to unfold. They wanted to see her awkwardness, her discomfort. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't here to be their entertainment. She was here to show them that they had no idea who she was. She stood tall, meeting Tyler's eyes with a level of confidence she hadn't known she could possess. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, the whispers of her being just the maid following her like a shadow. But this time, it didn't matter. She was not just the maid. She was something else, someone who refused to stay in the background any longer. Tyler offered her a drink, champagne, of course. He lifted his glass to her, a silent toast. She took it, but instead of letting herself sink into the role he had planned for her, she took a small sip and scanned the room. She wasn't just a part of his joke. She was part of this world now, whether they realized it or not, and she wasn't going to let them forget it. As the night progressed, Tyler continued his little games, introducing her to his friends and watching closely for any signs of discomfort. But the more he tried to push her into his mold, the more she defied it. Emily was not the shy, timid woman he'd expected. She wasn't the helpless maid to be laughed at. She had a quiet confidence, a strength he hadn't anticipated. She began to speak with the other guests, not just the women with their forced smiles, not just the men who thought they knew everything about her. Emily's wit was sharp, her intelligence on full display as she engaged in conversation with people who were far above her in status. The more they spoke with her, the more they realized they were the ones being outclassed. Tyler couldn't help but watch from the corner of his eye. He had never seen her like this, his own maid, holding court with his friends, her words flowing smoothly, her posture composed. Something was shifting, something that was beginning to unsettle him. The guests who had once looked at her as a joke now regarded her with genuine interest. Some even seemed impressed. The night wasn't going as he had planned, and it was starting to get under his skin. Isabella had arrived as nothing more than a pawn in his game, but now she was playing her own hand, and it was a hand that no one, especially not Tyler, could have expected. The night continued, But the shift was undeniable. Isabella was no longer the invisible woman standing in the corner, waiting to be dismissed. The more she spoke, the more she captivated the room. With every word, every glance, she revealed a side of herself no one had ever seen before. Not even Tyler. Tyler had invited her here to laugh at her, to see her squirm, to remind her of her place in his world. But as the evening wore on, he found himself struggling to maintain the upper hand. Guests who had once chuckled at the idea of a maid attending a gala were now leaning in to listen to Isabella. The way she spoke about art, about the books she loved, about the things that inspired her. There was an intellectual fire behind her words that even the most privileged could not ignore. Tyler watched, his smile slipping as he saw the change in the way people were looking at her. He wasn't sure whether he was more annoyed or fascinated. She had become the center of attention, not in the way he expected, but in a way that caught everyone off guard. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted. The group moved from discussing the latest fashion trends to deeper topics: politics, culture, the arts. Isabella was a natural, her intelligence drawing people in as easily as a magnet pulls iron. She had opinions, she had ideas, and she was willing to share them without fear of judgment. The elite of Beverly Hills, who often cloaked themselves in their designer labels and hollow conversations, were suddenly intrigued. It wasn't long before Tyler realized his mistake. He had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated the power of his own pride. He'd invited her here to make her the joke, but somehow, it was him who felt foolish. She moved through the crowd effortlessly now, engaging in conversation with Alexander DuPont, the art collector whose name was synonymous with power. They spoke about a recent exhibit at the LA Museum of Modern Art, and to Tyler's disbelief, they were connecting, on an intellectual level, a level Tyler had never even considered. Isabella, his maid, was holding her own against one of the city's most influential men. And then it happened. Tyler saw it in the eyes of the people around him. Respect. They were looking at her as if she was one of their own, not the help. He hated the way it felt, and he hated the way he was watching it unfold. In the corner of the room, Penelope, Tyler's ex-fiancée, stood watching the scene unfold with a cold expression. She had been observing Isabella from the moment she entered, her eyes narrowing as she watched the attention Isabella was garnering. Penelope wasn't used to being overshadowed. She wasn't used to being second. And she certainly wasn't used to someone like Isabella, someone who didn't belong in her world, getting all the attention. Penelope's lips curled into a tight smile, the kind of smile that had no warmth behind it. She knew exactly what Tyler was thinking. He was watching Isabella with too much interest, and she could feel the jealousy beginning to burn inside her. She wasn't about to let some maid, no matter how unexpectedly charming she was, take what she had worked so hard for. The air around Penelope seemed to crackle with tension. She wasn't about to let this go unnoticed. With a deliberate stride, she made her way toward Isabella, her eyes locked on her target. Isabella turned just as Penelope reached her, the two women coming face to face. Penelope's eyes flickered over Isabella, scanning her as if she were some kind of threat. But there was something about Isabella's calm, unwavering gaze that unnerved her. Isabella wasn't afraid of her, and that alone was enough to rattle Penelope. "So, you're the maid," Penelope said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Tyler sure knows how to pick his entertainment, doesn't he?" Isabella smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone being pushed around. It was a smile of someone who had just found her footing. "I'm not here for entertainment," she replied evenly. "I'm here because I belong." Penelope's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with irritation. But Isabella didn't flinch. If anything, it was Penelope who now seemed out of place. She had come to confront, to reclaim control, but Isabella wasn't the one she could control anymore. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two women faced off, the contrast between them stark and clear. Penelope, with her perfectly polished image and expensive gown, and Isabella, the woman who had come from nothing, standing in a simple yet elegant dress, her confidence sharper than any designer label. Tyler watched the scene unfold from the edge of the room. He had expected drama, but this was something else. He had hoped to see Isabella fail, to see her embarrassed. But now he was seeing her stand toe-to-toe with someone who had once held all the power in his life. And for the first time, Tyler realized that Isabella didn't need his approval to succeed. She had her own power. The power to transform, to surprise, to take control of a situation that had been set up for her humiliation. The moment Penelope opened her mouth again, Tyler interrupted. His voice was louder than expected, and it carried across the room, breaking the tension. "Penelope," he said firmly, "you don't know what you're talking about." Everyone turned to him, their gazes shifting between him and the women before him. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Tyler Grant had just spoken against Penelope, not in a moment of anger, but in defense of someone who had no place being defended. And it was in that moment, more than any other, that Isabella realized something she had never known before. Tyler Grant was not the one in control. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The undercurrent of tension that had once been filled with laughter and light conversation was now thick with uncertainty. Emily, who had been an outcast only hours ago, was now the focal point of the entire gala. Tyler's eyes followed her from across the room, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the shift. She wasn't just outshining Penelope, she was outshining everyone, and he hated it. He wasn't supposed to be the one left in awe. His attention was pulled away by Penelope, who stood next to him now, her lips pressed tightly together. She had been watching Isabella and could barely hide her disdain. Tyler could feel the weight of her stare, the sharp edge to her words as she whispered, "This is absurd, Tyler. You're letting her ruin everything." Tyler glanced back at Isabella, now surrounded by a few of his closest friends, all deep in conversation with her. How had she managed this? How had she turned his little joke into something real? Was it possible that he had misjudged her all along? That the woman who had always been in the background, taking orders without complaint, had the ability to move through this world with the same grace as those born into it? He was angry, frustrated, and more than a little confused. But there was something else. Something Tyler hadn't anticipated. Admiration. His attraction to her, though rooted in disbelief, was undeniable. After a few minutes of forced conversation with Penelope, Tyler excused himself and walked across the room, his eyes locked on Isabella. The tension between them was thick, and as he approached, the noise in the room seemed to fade into the background. Isabella felt him before she saw him. She could feel the change in the energy as Tyler moved toward her, his presence like a storm cloud rolling over the calm. She stood taller as he drew closer, unwilling to shrink back. She had spent her life blending into the shadows, but not tonight. Not anymore. Tyler stopped in front of her, standing just a bit too close. His eyes were hard, his jaw clenched. But there was something vulnerable in his posture that she had never seen before. He was used to power, used to holding all the cards. But tonight, those cards were slipping through his fingers. "Isabella," Tyler said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "This has gone far enough." Isabella didn't flinch. She had expected this. He was angry now, and he wasn't used to feeling powerless in his own home. But what he didn't know was that this time, she wasn't going to be his punchline. She wasn't going to back down. "Tyler," she replied coolly, her voice steady. "I'm not here for your amusement. I'm not here to be part of your game." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always seen her as the help, someone whose job was to serve and smile, someone whose life was supposed to stay quiet, in the background. But now, in the space between them, her voice held weight, her presence held weight, and Tyler had no idea how to handle that. "What are you talking about?" Tyler asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. Isabella turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "You invited me here tonight to mock me, to make me the joke, the spectacle. But the joke's on you, Tyler. I'm not here to play along anymore. This isn't your world to control." There was a beat of silence, thick and heavy, before Tyler spoke again. His voice was colder now, but there was a tremor in it that betrayed his confidence. "You think this is easy, don't you? You think this is all about showing me up. But you're wrong. This is my world. You have no place here." The words stung, but Isabella didn't let him see it. Instead, she stood her ground, meeting his gaze without flinching. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her, but she wouldn't let him win. Not this time. "You're right," she said quietly. I don't belong here. But neither do you. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring him to respond. Tyler opened his mouth to say something, anything. But before he could, the room around them shifted once more. Derek Stone appeared out of nowhere, his voice cutting through the thick tension. Is there a problem here? Derek asked, his eyes moving between Tyler and Isabella with an almost knowing glance. He could see the conflict between them, the struggle for control. But Derek wasn't intimidated. He had no interest in the petty power games that surrounded Tyler Grant. What intrigued him was Isabella. Tyler glanced at Derek, a momentary flicker of irritation crossing his face before he masked it with a forced smile. No problem, he muttered, his tone clipped. Just a little misunderstanding. Derek didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the matter. He turned his attention back to Isabella, offering her a small, reassuring smile. Shall we? He asked, extending his arm to her. Isabella hesitated only for a moment before taking his arm. She could feel Tyler's eyes on her as she walked away, his presence a palpable weight at her back. As they moved toward the other side of the room, she could almost feel the shift in the air. The power dynamics had changed, and this time, it wasn't in Tyler's favor. The night was far from over, but something had shifted. Isabella had made her mark, and Tyler knew it. There would be no going back now. The night dragged on, but the tension never seemed to leave the air. Every time Tyler looked at Isabella, there was a nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach, an unsettling sense that he was losing control of the very situation he had created. It wasn't just the way she spoke to him, or how effortlessly she navigated the conversations with his friends. It was the way the crowd responded to her, like she had always belonged here, like she had always been a part of their world, and they had just never noticed her. But Tyler couldn't focus on that for long, not with Penelope glaring at him from across the room, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She wasn't speaking to him, but the tension in her stare was enough to make anyone uncomfortable. Penelope's presence was always a reminder of the life Tyler had built, a life where he was expected to follow the rules, to marry the right woman, to live up to the legacy of his family. But tonight, Isabella was challenging everything, and it terrified him. And then, as if the night wasn't complicated enough, a voice broke through his thoughts. Tyler Grant, I didn't expect to see you here. Tyler turned, surprised by the familiar voice. It was deep, calm, with just a hint of amusement. He hadn't heard it in years. There, standing in the doorway, was Derek Stone, a name Tyler hadn't heard in too long. Derek was a philanthropist, a self-made millionaire, and someone who had been a part of Tyler's circle years ago. But Derek had always been different. He had the wealth, the power, but he was never interested in playing the games Tyler and his family thrived on. Instead, he used his influence to help others, to make the world a better place. That made him a bit of an anomaly in their world. Derek's presence was unexpected, but what made it even more surprising was the way he looked at Isabella. His eyes lingered on her with an intensity that made Tyler's stomach turn. Derek, Tyler said, forcing a smile, though his unease was evident. I didn't expect you to show up tonight. Derek's smile was knowing, his eyes still on Isabella as she stood across the room. I wasn't planning to, Derek replied casually, but I heard some interesting things about someone I used to know. Thought I'd drop by and see if there's any truth to the rumors. Tyler's heart skipped a beat. Rumors? What rumors? He hadn't heard anything, but the way Derek spoke, as though he knew exactly what was happening, made Tyler uneasy. He glanced at Isabella, who was still deep in conversation with his friends, looking unbothered, unaware of the storm that was slowly brewing around her. Derek's gaze finally shifted back to Tyler, his expression unreadable. I see things are complicated, he said, his tone measured, almost too calm. But I have to admit, I'm impressed. Tyler didn't have time to ask Derek what he meant before the man continued. I think you've been underestimating her, Tyler. The words hit Tyler like a cold splash of water. Underestimating her? He wasn't sure what that meant. Had Derek seen something he hadn't? Or was he just as confused as Tyler about Isabella's sudden transformation? I don't know what you mean, Tyler said, his voice defensive now, the mask of control starting to slip. She's just my maid. Nothing more. Derek raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. She's not just your maid, Tyler. She's a lot more than that. You're lucky she's still willing to play by your rules. The words stung more than Tyler expected. He had always seen Derek as a friend, someone he respected. But now, with Derek's cryptic comments, Tyler felt his confidence faltering. The more he watched Isabella, the more he realized that he hadn't seen the full picture. He had invited her here as a joke, as a way to assert his dominance, but now she was challenging everything. Everything he thought he knew about power, about control, and about his own life. Derek's eyes flicked toward Isabella again, this time with more interest. "You're going to lose her, you know," Derek said, his voice quiet but certain. "If you don't figure out what's really going on, she'll slip right through your fingers. And I don't think you want that." Tyler watched Derek's gaze follow Isabella across the room, as if the man could already see the future. Derek wasn't wrong. Tyler knew it. But he wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Not in front of everyone. Tyler opened his mouth to say something, to brush Derek off, but nothing came out. Derek's words, his presence, left him rattled. He turned back to Isabella, but she was already gone. She had slipped away, just like that. Was she intentionally distancing herself from him? Or was she simply choosing not to be a part of his world anymore? Tyler stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the glittering elite. But suddenly, he felt completely alone. The night had slipped away from him, and as much as he hated it, he knew he couldn't go back. What had begun as a joke had become something much bigger than he was ready to handle. As the gala continued, Tyler realized one thing. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. As the night wore on, the once lively atmosphere of the gala had taken a darker turn. Tyler could feel the unease creeping into his every step. He had always been in control. Everything in his life had been neatly compartmentalized, orchestrated to perfection. But now, as he stood in the center of the room, surrounded by whispers and side glances, he realized something that both terrified and excited him. He was losing control. He had invited Isabella to mock her, but now she was a problem he couldn't ignore. And there was someone else in the room who wasn't going to let him forget it. Penelope, his ex-fiancée, stood across the room, arms crossed, glaring at him with the intensity of a woman who had just realized she was no longer the center of his world. Penelope's presence had always been familiar, a part of his life for years, a woman he had been groomed to marry, someone his family approved of. But now, as she glared at him, her eyes full of frustration and jealousy, Tyler realized that he had grown tired of playing her game. He had once believed their relationship was the right choice, the logical choice. But now, it felt suffocating. Tyler's eyes flickered toward Isabella, who was talking to Derek Stone again. She looked effortless, calm, poised, and completely in control of the conversation. Her smile was easy, her laughter genuine. But Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something deeper was happening between them. It was clear to him now. Derek Stone wasn't just a curious bystander. He was interested in Isabella. And the more Tyler watched, the more he realized he was losing her. Penelope saw it too. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Derek and Isabella's interaction. She didn't even try to hide her disdain. She was no longer the calm, composed woman Tyler had once known. There was something sharp, desperate in the way she moved across the room, making her way toward him with purpose. "Tyler," Penelope said, her voice cool but laced with something darker. "We need to talk." Her words were flat, but they carried an edge that made his stomach twist. There was no warmth in her eyes, just calculation and bitterness. Tyler turned to her, trying to mask his own discomfort. "What's going on, Penelope?" he asked, his voice tight. "Isn't this a bit dramatic? We're at a party." Penelope took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. "Dramatic?" she repeated, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "I think you are the one being dramatic, Tyler. You've been staring at her all night, and I'm not blind." Tyler stiffened. Penelope had always been sharp, always a step ahead. But this felt different. Penelope was right. He had been staring at Isabella. He couldn't help it. Something about the way she moved, the way she held herself in this world that wasn't hers, had gotten under his skin. The fact that Penelope saw it only made him more aware of his own feelings. "You think I haven't noticed, Tyler?" Penelope continued, her voice growing louder with each word. "You're falling for her, the maid, the woman you invited here to mock. You're an idiot if you think I haven't figured that out." The words stung more than Tyler expected. Penelope's anger, her vulnerability, it all came pouring out, and for the first time, he didn't know how to react. He had been so certain of everything, of Penelope, of his place in the world, of his control over his life. But now, in the face of her accusations, it felt like everything was crumbling. "I'm not falling for anyone, Penelope," he snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. But even as he said the words, they didn't feel true. He knew deep down that Penelope had a point. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Isabella, but he couldn't understand it either. Penelope's laugh was cold, but there was no humor in it. "You're a fool," she said, her eyes flashing with a mix of jealousy and hurt. "But I guess that's what you do best these days." She turned on her heel and walked away without another word. Tyler stood there, alone in the middle of the room, his mind racing. What was happening to him? The way Isabella had caught his attention, the way she had held her ground. He had never seen her like this. And Derek's interest in her wasn't making things any easier. Tyler hated the idea of losing her to someone like him. Derek was everything he wasn't: calm, collected, and completely uninterested in the games of power and wealth Tyler played. It was almost like Derek didn't need to prove anything. But Isabella wasn't a pawn to be claimed, and she wasn't part of the life Tyler had spent years building. She was her own person, independent, strong, and real. And that was what made her so damn dangerous. Across the room, Derek and Isabella shared a quiet conversation, the distance between them now charged with something new, something Tyler couldn't place, but could feel. Every part of him wanted to march over there and demand answers. He wanted to feel that same control he always had, but he couldn't. Isabella wasn't his to command, not anymore. The gala continued, but Tyler's mind was elsewhere. His gaze kept drifting back to Isabella, and every time he tried to refocus on the guests around him, his thoughts wandered right back to her. He wasn't sure what had changed. Maybe it was the way she held herself, or maybe it was the realization that he had no idea who she really was. But for the first time in his life, he was beginning to feel something more than just desire. He was feeling a sense of loss, and it scared him. As the evening unfolded, the chaos of Tyler's emotions began to weigh heavily on him. He couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. Every time he tried to focus on the conversation at hand, his mind wandered back to her. The way she moved through the crowd with ease, the way she held her own, even in the face of ridicule. She wasn't just some maid. No, Isabella was something far more complicated. And Tyler was beginning to realize that he had made a huge mistake in underestimating her. But before he could process his thoughts, a familiar voice cut through the haze of his confusion. "Tyler," his mother, Catherine Grant, said, her tone sharp as she made her way toward him. "We need to talk." Tyler winced inwardly. There was something about the way his mother spoke to him that made him feel like a child again, like he was constantly under her watchful eye. Catherine Grant was the epitome of control, her perfectly groomed appearance and icy demeanor a constant reminder of the life Tyler had been raised to lead. A life that didn't leave room for mistakes, for deviations from the path she had laid out for him. Catherine stood in front of him, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Tyler. "What's going on with you tonight?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "You've been distracted all evening." Tyler opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He wasn't sure how to explain what was happening. How do you explain to your mother that you were beginning to fall for someone who didn't fit into the carefully constructed life she had built for you? Someone who, in her eyes, was beneath you, beneath everything you had worked for? "I'm fine, Mother," he said, his voice tight, trying to force a smile. "Just a bit tired." Catherine's eyes narrowed. She wasn't buying it. She had known Tyler too long to be fooled by his half-hearted answers. "Tyler, don't lie to me. I saw how you were looking at her," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper but filled with venom. "The maid. Why is she here? What's going on between you two?" Tyler felt a surge of frustration. He had never been able to escape the weight of his mother's expectations. She was the one who had pushed him toward Penelope all these years, the one who had built the vision of his life, the one who had arranged his every move with precision. And now, suddenly, he was supposed to explain himself to her? "It's nothing, Mom," he said, his voice growing more defensive. "She's just here as part of the party." But his words felt hollow, even to himself. Catherine wasn't convinced. She took a step closer, her presence looming over him like a storm cloud. "Don't fool yourself, Tyler. You've been acting strange all night. I see the way you've been looking at her." She paused, her lips curling into a slight, knowing smile. "I hope you're not getting attached to her. She's not the type of woman you need. You know what's expected of you." Tyler bristled at her words, his hands clenching at his sides. He knew what she meant. She was talking about Penelope, his perfect fiancée, the woman who fit every box on his family's list, the woman his mother had chosen for him, the woman who would help him maintain his place in the world where women like Isabella had no place. "I know, Mom," he replied, though the words felt like a betrayal of everything he was starting to feel. He wasn't sure anymore. He wasn't sure about anything. Catherine, satisfied with his response, gave him one last look of warning before she turned away. "Don't forget what you're here for, Tyler," she said, her voice cold and final. "This isn't a game. You've worked too hard to throw it all away over someone like her." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tyler felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he watched his mother walk away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. It was always the same. Expectations, duty, tradition. It was the world he had been born into, a world where everything was mapped out for him before he even had a chance to decide for himself. And then, without thinking, his gaze drifted back to Isabella. She was standing by the windows now, talking to Derek, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights outside. She didn't belong here. She was a woman from a world far removed from the one Tyler inhabited, and yet somehow, she felt more real than anything else in this room. Tyler couldn't help it. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to be drawn to her, but the more he fought it, the more it consumed him. Was this what it meant to want someone beyond your reach? But no matter how strong the pull, Tyler knew what his family expected. He couldn't afford to disappoint them, not after all the work he had done to secure his place at the top. And yet, a small part of him, a part that was starting to grow louder, wondered if there was more to life than following the rules, more than just fulfilling the legacy his mother had set out for him. For the first time, Tyler Grant wasn't sure he wanted to be the man his family had groomed him to be, and that scared him more than anything else. As the night continued, Tyler found himself torn between the life he had been raised to live, the woman he had been told to marry, and the undeniable pull he felt toward Isabella. The gala was a spectacle of wealth and power, but for Tyler, it had become a battlefield. The glittering lights, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, none of it mattered anymore. All that filled his mind was the internal tug-of-war between the life his family had chosen for him and the growing, undeniable pull toward Isabella. As the night went on, the conversations around him seemed to blur into white noise. He couldn't concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to Isabella. Every time he looked at her, it was as if the world outside their little bubble stopped. She was the only thing that felt real. But he couldn't ignore the warning voice inside his head, the one that kept reminding him of his duty, of the promises his family had made. Penelope, Catherine, his legacy. They all demanded his attention, his compliance, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt suffocating. Isabella's laughter echoed across the room, a sound that seemed to break through the suffocating tension inside Tyler's chest. He turned to see her standing with Derek Stone again, her head tilted back as she laughed at something Derek had said. And for a brief moment, Tyler could swear he saw a flash of something in her eyes, something that made his heart race, something that made him question everything he had ever known. Derek, to his credit, was a charmer. Confident, relaxed, a man who was used to getting what he wanted. And Tyler could see how Derek's presence affected Isabella. She seemed at ease, unguarded, in a way that Tyler had never seen before. Was it Derek who had won her over? Or was it the fact that Isabella had finally begun to see herself for what she truly was, someone deserving of this world? Tyler's jaw clenched. He couldn't stand the thought of losing her to Derek. He had spent so long building his empire, constructing a life that was supposed to make him untouchable, and yet, here he was, unable to hold on to the one thing that mattered most. With a sharp breath, Tyler walked over to the two of them, his mind made up. He needed to act before it was too late, before Derek had a chance to steal her away. But as he approached, he felt the coolness in Isabella's demeanor. She had sensed his presence. She turned, a knowing look in her eyes. She had been aware of him all along. "Tyler," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying an edge that made him pause. She didn't smile. Didn't offer the politeness he had come to expect from her. She was standing there, unafraid, facing him head-on, as if daring him to challenge her. "I see you've been enjoying yourself," Tyler said, trying to keep his tone light, but it came out more strained than he intended. Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly, and she crossed her arms. "I'm just having a conversation with an old friend," she said. "Something you'd probably do better to pay attention to, Tyler. Seems like you've been ignoring everyone all night." Tyler's chest tightened. He had been trying to keep his distance, trying to convince himself that it was just a fleeting moment, something he could control. But as she spoke to him like this, with such boldness, it struck a nerve. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just someone to be dismissed or played with. She was her own person, and that terrified him. "You're not my concern," Tyler said, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. But there was no venom in his voice, only frustration. He didn't mean it, not really. But Isabella didn't seem to take it personally. In fact, she almost seemed to welcome it. "Then why are you so angry, Tyler?" Isabella asked, her voice soft yet piercing. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with a confidence that unsettled him. "Why does it bother you so much that I'm here? That I'm talking to Derek? If I'm not your concern, then you shouldn't care." Tyler felt a surge of emotion he couldn't control. The room around him, the luxury, the power. None of it mattered when faced with the quiet intensity of Isabella's gaze. She wasn't the joke anymore. She was the one holding all the cards. "I don't want you to think that you can just walk into my world and take whatever you want," Tyler snapped, his words sharp. The frustration, the fear of losing her, it all came to a head in that moment. But before Isabella could respond, Penelope reappeared, stepping into the conversation with an icy smile plastered on her face. She had been watching from the sidelines, and it was clear she had a plan of her own. "Is everything all right, Tyler?" Penelope asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. But there was a coldness behind her words, an edge that was all too familiar. She was trying to take control, trying to position herself back in Tyler's life where she belonged. She always had a way of doing that, slipping into his world, forcing him to choose her, whether he wanted to or not. Tyler turned to her, his frustration with Penelope barely contained. She had always been the one who expected to be chosen, the one who demanded attention. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, Isabella had captured his focus, and no matter how much Penelope tried to force herself into the equation, he couldn't bring himself to look away from the woman who had unexpectedly upended everything. Penelope sensed it. She could see the subtle shift in Tyler's demeanor, the way his eyes kept darting to Isabella, and it was enough to make her blood boil. She stepped closer to Tyler, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're making a mistake, Tyler," she warned, her tone dark and dangerous. "You don't know who you're dealing with. She'll never fit into your world." But Tyler wasn't listening. He couldn't. The words Penelope spoke felt like they were slipping through his fingers. All he could focus on was the quiet truth that lingered between him and Isabella. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who had seen through him, seen through the life he had built. And she wasn't afraid to call him out on it. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Penelope," Tyler said, his voice low, but firm. And you're wrong. I don't think I ever truly understood who she was. The room fell silent. Penelope's eyes widened in disbelief, and Isabella, standing across from them, simply watched. The tension between the three of them was palpable, a simmering storm waiting to break. Tyler didn't know what to say next, didn't know what to do. He had spoken from his heart, but the consequences of those words were starting to set in. And as the reality of what he had just admitted sank in, he realized that the night was far from over. The real battle had only just begun. The tension between Tyler, Isabella, and Penelope was unbearable. Each word, each glance, like a thread pulling tighter and tighter. The room, once filled with laughter and music, now felt like a pressure cooker, each moment threatening to explode. Tyler could feel it in the air. His world was crumbling, and he couldn't hold it together anymore. What had started as a joke, an evening of mockery and amusement, had turned into something he couldn't control. Tyler's gaze flicked to Isabella again. She wasn't looking at him now. She wasn't looking at anyone. She had withdrawn into herself, her eyes distant, as though she had made a decision. She was done. And the thought hit Tyler like a punch in the gut. He couldn't let her leave. Not like this. Not when he had just started to understand what she meant to him. Penelope, sensing Tyler's growing unease, moved in closer, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Tyler, darling," she said, her voice sweet but cold. "Don't let her get to you. She's just a maid. She doesn't belong here. She never will." Tyler flinched at her words, the venom in her voice cutting deeper than he expected. He knew Penelope had always been possessive, but tonight, there was something darker in her tone. She was losing her grip on him, and she wasn't about to let go without a fight. "I don't care about that, Penelope," Tyler snapped, brushing her hand away, the frustration bubbling over. "I don't care about what you or anyone else thinks. This isn't about her place in the world. It's about—" He stopped mid-sentence, his mind racing, trying to find the words. What was it about Isabella? Why did he feel this way? He had been so sure of everything, his path, his future, his place in the world. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that she was the one who had the power. Not him, not his wealth, not his name. It was Isabella who held all the cards. Penelope's eyes narrowed, her smile tightening into something more sinister. She wasn't stupid. She could see it in Tyler's eyes, the change in him, the way he was looking at Isabella, like he couldn't tear himself away, like he couldn't stop himself from falling for her. Penelope stepped closer to Tyler, her voice soft now, almost a whisper. "Tyler, don't make a fool of yourself. You know what will happen if you let this continue. She's not for you. She's never going to fit into our world. She's just a distraction." The words stung, but Tyler didn't react. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew Penelope was wrong. He had never wanted to admit it, but he had always been more drawn to the idea of Penelope than the reality of her. They were too similar, too polished, too perfect. And now, looking at Isabella, he realized how empty that perfection was. Isabella had made her way to the grand windows, standing alone, her face illuminated by the city lights outside. She looked beautiful, serene, but there was an underlying sadness to her expression, as though she had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to stay in this world of pretense, of lies, of expectations. She was above all of it, and Tyler realized, far too late, that she had always been. But now, as the final realization hit him, it was already too late. He watched her for a moment longer, feeling the weight of everything he had tried to ignore. His heart ached as he saw her glance toward the door, as though she had already made the decision to leave. The finality of it hit him harder than he could have anticipated. She was slipping away, and he couldn't stop her. In a moment of desperation, Tyler stood up abruptly, his legs shaking beneath him. He couldn't let her walk out of this place, out of his life, without trying. He had to do something. Anything. He couldn't lose her. not when he had just started to understand what she meant to him. But as he moved toward her, it was too late. Isabella had already turned and was walking toward the exit. Her gaze never met his, her back straight, her steps resolute. She wasn't looking back. "Isabella!" Tyler called out, his voice raw. "Please, don't go!" She paused, her hand on the door handle, her body still turned away from him. For a long moment, there was silence. He thought she hadn't heard him, thought she might just leave without a word. But then, she turned slowly, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time all night, Tyler saw something in her eyes that took his breath away. "I'm sorry, Tyler," Isabella said, her voice soft but firm. "But I don't belong here, and I don't think you do either. Not anymore." And with that, she was gone. Tyler stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know how to process it. He didn't know what he was feeling: regret, loss, fear, all mingling together in a whirlwind of emotion. But one thing was certain: he had lost her, and no amount of wealth, power, or status could bring her back. Outside, the cool night air hit Isabella as she walked down the driveway, away from the mansion and the world she had been forced into. She had done what she came to do. She had shown Tyler, and everyone else, that she wasn't just someone to be played with. She was more than the life they had tried to assign her. Isabella didn't look back as she disappeared into the night. She was free, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe. The following days were a blur for Tyler. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt cold and empty. Every corner reminded him of Isabella, of the way she moved through his world, unknowingly shaking its very foundation. He had invited her here to humiliate her, to show her her place. But instead, she had done the unthinkable. She had made him question his own. The mansion, his empire, all the wealth he had fought so hard to build, they suddenly felt hollow. It wasn't just about losing Isabella anymore. It was about realizing that everything he had worked for, everything he had lived for, wasn't as meaningful as he once believed. She had shown him that. And now, she was gone. Tyler spent the next few days in a daze, unable to focus on anything. Meetings were missed, phone calls went unanswered. He couldn't bring himself to care. He found himself thinking about Isabella constantly, the way her voice had softened when she spoke, the calm certainty she had in her eyes. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, and now she was slipping further and further away from him. Meanwhile, Isabella was far away from the world she had been forced into. She had retreated to a small apartment she had rented months ago, just in case. It was a modest space, but it was hers, free from the constant judgment and expectations of the Grant family. Here, she could breathe, could finally think clearly. The noise of the gala, of Tyler's world, felt distant now. But even in her new solitude, the weight of what had transpired pressed heavily on her. She hadn't expected to be so shaken by leaving. When she walked out of the mansion that night, she had felt empowered, in control. But now, in the quiet of her apartment, a nagging thought lingered at the back of her mind. Had she made the right choice? For a moment, she questioned herself. Could she have stayed? Could she have worked through the tension with Tyler, maybe even built something? But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She had made the right decision. She wasn't going to be a pawn in his world, not any longer. She was Isabella, not just the maid, not just the girl he had tried to use for his amusement. But even as she thought this, a part of her couldn't help but wonder what could have been. Tyler had seen something in her that night, something real. And though she knew she couldn't go back, the temptation to return to the world she had briefly tasted lingered. Could she ever truly escape that life? Could she find happiness in a world so different from the one she had once dreamed of? Days passed, and Isabella's mind remained clouded with uncertainty. She couldn't shake the memory of Tyler's face, the way his expression had faltered when she left, the regret in his eyes. It haunted her. She hadn't expected to have that effect on him. She hadn't expected to leave an imprint on someone so accustomed to being in control. Tyler, meanwhile, had reached a breaking point. He could no longer ignore the fact that his world was falling apart. Every moment without Isabella felt like an eternity. The silence was deafening. He had been so sure of himself before she arrived, so confident in the life he had built. But now, he was haunted by her absence. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she held herself, the fire in her eyes when she stood up to him, the warmth of her smile, even when she was faced with the harshest of circumstances. He had never seen anyone like her, and he couldn't let her go, not without trying to make things right. But what could he say? What could he do to fix the mess he had made? Every word he had spoken to her, the jokes, the arrogance, the assumption that she would play along, felt like a betrayal now. He had been so blind to her worth, so caught up in his own life, that he had failed to see what she could offer. And now, he was paying the price for it. He tried to reach her, tried to call, to text, but there was nothing. Her responses were cold, distant. She had made up her mind, and Tyler knew it. She wasn't coming back. It was late one evening, several days after the gala, when Tyler received a call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end wasn't. It was Derek Stone. Tyler. Derek's voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an underlying tension. I think we need to talk. Tyler felt his pulse quicken. He knew this conversation was coming. He had been avoiding it for days, but now, there was no escaping it. Derek had known what was happening between him and Isabella. He knew the unspoken tension that had been building, and Tyler couldn't help but feel a mixture of guilt and anxiety as he waited for Derek to speak again. Isabella's a strong woman, Tyler, Derek continued, his tone steady. But she's not going to wait around for you to figure things out. She's made her choice, and I think you need to respect that. Tyler's mind raced. Made her choice? What did Derek mean by that? Was she already moving on? Had she truly given up on him? I know, Tyler said, his voice strained. I know. I've messed up. Derek's silence on the other end spoke volumes. Tyler could hear the weight of his words settling between them. Derek was right, of course. He had messed up, and now the consequences were clear. But Tyler didn't want to accept it. Not yet. But it's not over, Tyler said, almost to himself. I can fix this. I can still make it right. Derek let out a small sigh. I don't think you can, Tyler. Not without truly understanding what's at stake. And I don't think you're ready for that. The line went silent for a moment, and in that silence, Tyler realized something. Derek was right. He wasn't ready. Not yet. He had been too caught up in his own world, too blind to the things that really mattered. As Tyler sat there, alone in his office, the weight of his mistakes crashing down on him, he knew there was only one way forward. He would have to change. He would have to let go of the world he had built and start anew. But the question remained, would it be too late by the time he was ready? Days stretched into weeks, and Tyler's life became a haze of distractions, phone calls, and endless meetings. But no matter how hard he tried to immerse himself in his usual routine, one thought lingered at the back of his mind. Isabella. It was as if she had taken root in his thoughts, her absence more suffocating than any presence ever could be. He spent every waking moment regretting what he had done, unable to shake the image of her standing there, leaving him behind. But what hurt the most was the knowledge that she was moving on without him. She had chosen herself, something he had never done in his life. Tyler's mind swirled with possibilities. What if he could make things right? What if he could show Isabella that he was capable of change? That he wasn't just another man who would take advantage of her, who would make her feel small for his own amusement? He knew it wouldn't be easy. Isabella had drawn a clear line between them the night she left. She had walked out of his world with a quiet dignity, refusing to stay in a place where she didn't belong. She had chosen herself, her own freedom, over the suffocating chains of expectation that had held her down for too long. But Tyler couldn't just sit here, in the same empty house, and let her slip away. Not when he knew, deep down, that what he felt for her wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It was something deeper, something that went beyond her beauty, beyond her confidence. It was the way she had made him question everything. His life, his choices, his world. Tyler stood up from his desk, the weight of his decision settling over him. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He couldn't hide behind his wealth, his title, his family's expectations. Not anymore. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through the contacts with shaking hands. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a phone call. He needed to see her. He needed to look her in the eyes and make her understand that he wasn't just asking for her forgiveness. He was asking for a chance. Her chance to show him that he could be more than what he had been. With a deep breath, he dialed the number. His heart was pounding, his thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and hope. When the phone rang, Tyler's mind raced, but the moment the call was answered, he found himself unable to speak. It was like a block had formed in his throat. "Hello?" Isabella's voice was softer than he remembered, more guarded. She didn't even sound surprised to hear from him, as if she had already expected this moment to come. Her voice, however, lacked the warmth it once held. There was only distance now. Tyler's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Isabella, His words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to apologize, didn't know how to fix what he had broken. "I need to see you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tyler could almost hear her weighing his words, deciding whether or not to engage with him again. His heart raced, his pulse thundering in his ears. He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if she would shut him down completely, but he had to try. "I don't think that's a good idea, Tyler," Isabella replied, her voice quiet but firm. "We're not in the same place anymore. You can't just fix this with a conversation." Her words hit Tyler like a slap to the face. He had known it would be difficult, but hearing her so calm, so resolute in her decision, made him realize just how far apart they truly were. "I know I've made mistakes," Tyler said, his voice cracking with the weight of his emotions. "But I can't let you go, not like this. Please, just give me a chance. I'm not asking for things to be the same, just let me show you that I can be better, that I'm not the man I was." Another long silence followed. Tyler could feel the tension building, the uncertainty hanging between them like a thick fog. He wanted to reach through the phone, to somehow make her understand how much he had changed, how deeply he regretted everything he had done. Finally, Isabella spoke again, her voice much softer, but still resolute. "I don't need to see you change, Tyler. I need to see you believe in yourself, in your own worth. I can't be the one to make you better. You have to do that for yourself." Tyler's chest tightened as he absorbed her words. She was right. She had always been right. He had spent so much time trying to fix his world, trying to fix her, trying to control everything around him that he had lost sight of the one thing that mattered most, himself. And now, standing at the edge of losing her forever, Tyler realized that the only way forward was to do the hard work on his own. "I understand," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I'll do the work, Isabella. I promise. I'm not asking for you to wait for me. I'm just asking for a chance. To be better." For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of the phone, the sound of two people who had shared a life together, yet were now standing on opposite sides of something neither of them fully understood. Isabella sighed, and Tyler could hear the quiet resignation in it. "I don't know what the future holds, Tyler, but I'm not going to wait around for you to figure it out. I hope you do find what you're looking for. I really do." With those final words, she hung up, and Tyler was left standing in the quiet of his office, the phone still pressed to his ear. The weight of her absence felt heavier now, more permanent, but as the minutes passed, a strange clarity settled over him. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time he was finally willing to face it, on his own terms. Isabella had left him with a choice, and for once, Tyler understood that it wasn't about her anymore. It was about him. It was about whether he could find the strength to change, to truly transform himself, or whether he would remain the man who had hidden behind his wealth and power all his life. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time, Tyler didn't feel alone. He had a chance to do better, to make amends, and that, for now, was enough. Weeks passed, and the space between Tyler and Isabella grew wider. They were no longer a part of each other's world. But their stories, however separate, continued to shape their futures. Tyler kept his promise. He immersed himself in the work of self-reflection, beginning a journey that would take years, not days. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of his past choices seemed too heavy to carry. But with each passing day, he learned more about himself, about his weaknesses, his need for control, and how far from the man he wanted to be he had fallen. He started attending therapy, seeking guidance from those who had nothing to gain from his wealth or name. He started reaching out to the people in his life who had always supported him, his father, old friends, even Derek Stone, who had become something of a mentor, helping Tyler navigate the complexities of his emotional journey. But as the days turned into months, Tyler began to understand the most important lesson of all. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the mistakes he had made, the pain he had caused. What he could do was move forward, with honesty, humility, and a newfound respect for those he had once taken for granted. He realized that the person he had been, the man of arrogance, entitlement, and control, had died the night Isabella walked out of his life. The man who was standing now, though still flawed, was someone who had learned to listen, someone who had learned the hard way that the world didn't revolve around him. And in this new understanding, Tyler had found a kind of peace he hadn't known before. As for Isabella, life moved forward for her as well. She never returned to the world Tyler had offered. Instead, she carved out her own path, one that didn't need validation from anyone, least of all from a man like Tyler Grant. She threw herself into her career, building something of her own. She started her own design company, her natural talent and drive shining through in every project she took on. Her reputation grew, and soon, she was sought after by those who admired her talent, not her background. She had found her place, not in a world that saw her as a maid or an outsider, but in one where she could create, innovate, and be truly seen for who she was. She made new friends, built her own family of sorts, and every day felt more like her own. Tyler's world, once so tempting, had faded into the background, and the life she had chosen was one she could be proud of. And yet, despite the distance between them, neither Tyler nor Isabella ever truly forgot the other. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic return to each other's arms. Their paths had diverged, and though they each held a part of the other's story, they knew that their lives had to move in different directions. Tyler, now in control of his own journey, respected Isabella's choice to leave his world behind. He no longer wanted her to fit into his life. He wanted her to live the life she deserved, on her own terms, and if that meant they would never cross paths again, he would accept it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Months after their last conversation, Isabella received a letter from Tyler. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to win her back. It was something different, something far more meaningful. He wrote about his journey of change, about the man he had become, and most importantly, how much he respected her decision to leave him behind. The letter ended with these words: "I'm not asking for you to return to me. I'm simply telling you that you've helped me become the man I never thought I could be. And for that, I will always be grateful." Isabella read the letter over and over, her fingers tracing the words Tyler had written. She felt a flicker of something, perhaps relief, perhaps closure. It wasn't a happily ever after, not in the way she had once dreamed. But it was something better. It was the acknowledgement of her strength, her decision, and the growth they both had undergone. Isabella placed the letter in a drawer, tucked away safely. She had long since moved on from the woman she had been that night at the gala, just as Tyler had moved on from the man he had once been. But their stories, their journeys, would always be a part of who they were. And so, the chapter of Tyler and Isabella's relationship closed. It wasn't the fairy tale they might have imagined, but it was their story, of growth, of self-discovery, and ultimately, of the quiet peace that comes when two people let go of what they thought they needed and find themselves instead. Isabella continued to build her empire of design, unshaken by the world that had once tried to define her. Tyler, now a man of substance, dedicated to making amends in his own life, found fulfillment in his personal growth. They never saw each other again, but in a way, they had already found what they were looking for, themselves. Some stories don't end with dramatic reconciliations or perfect conclusions. Some stories end with acceptance. Acceptance of the past, the choices made, and the people they became along the way. And in that, there was beauty. In that, there was peace.